Okay, hello. I'm Jared Carpenter. We are Team Door. We're doing home automation for our Capstone. This is my team.
I'm Anthony Zadell.
I'm Zach Snyder.
Travis Warren.
Okay, so you may be asking yourself, what is home automation? Well, home automation is the automation of particular devices in the home interconnected via a network. Automation is something that's been around for a long time, but it's up until recently it's been too expensive to be exploited in the home market. Think of things like the assembly line or the printing press. Much too big, much too expensive to have in the home. So what are we doing? We're automating the front door, the garage door, and a security system. So with the front door, we're going to open and unlock, close and lock. With the garage door, we're going to open and close. We don't need to bother with locking because modern motorized garage doors lock automatically. The security system will cover the front door and windows via pressure sensors, as well as have cameras that will alert you of perpetrators. So why are we doing this? Well, the Internet of Things has kind of become a thing recently where devices are getting microcontrollers put into them. One thing that comes to mind is the quirky egg minder, which is a egg tray connected to the internet that tells you via mobile application whether your eggs are good or bad. We want to try to do something a little more practical. And something that's allowed us to do that is the proliferation of smartphones. Everybody has a smartphone. Everybody knows how to use a smartphone, and this is a very natural portal in order to automate and control all the separate devices. The marketplace is very open. There are no big players in the home automation marketplace. To talk a little bit about hardware, I'm going to pass it along to Zach Schneider.
All right. The hardware that we're using is we're going to be using 3 separate Raspberry Pis connected to the house. And you may be asking, why are we using Raspberry Pi? Well, Raspberry Pi has several distinct advantages over its competitors, mainly BeagleBone and Arduino. Raspberry Pi has more operating power and processing power and is able to do more things over a network, which is what we're wanting with home automation, than Arduino, and it is a more cost-efficient version than the BeagleBone. The BeagleBone runs about $89 to $100 per unit, depending on how much processing power and how much RAM you want. The Raspberry Pi, we're going to be using the Model B Plus, which runs about $40, and the Model B will be running about $35. So as you see, it's a lot more cost efficient to use a Raspberry Pi over this than a BeagleBone, even though they are very similar in processing power. Now, the BeagleBone also is a lot more complex for what we want to do. We want to make this easy to install. A BeagleBone has more onboard coding than a Raspberry Pi would have to do. You would have to code more on the GPIO pins of what you need them to do. And the Raspberry Pi is a lot more plug-and-play capable. So we can plug up our servos, we can plug up our motors, and we'll be a lot more ready to go based on the built-in functions of the Pi than having to program every little thing that gets detailed. Now, we will have Raspberry Pis located in 3 areas. They will be the window connected to a home security system, the door connected to the same system, as well as how it controls the door, and a Raspberry Pi connected to a garage door. I will go in a little depth about how we're going to use each one. I'll start with the simplest one. I'll start with the window. What the window is a Raspberry Pi connected with a Wi-Fi module in the USB port and a shield, a 5-volt shield to help with electronics and help to make sure the Raspberry Pi device does not short out itself. Now what we're going to do is we're going to have a glass window with a piece of either clear plastic or aluminum foil, and we are going to create a circuit with the Raspberry Pi. So we're going to push electrical currents through the foil and through the plastic to make a circuit. And when that circuit is broken via unauthorized entry, the window being damaged, or something else, someone pops open a window, whatever, you will receive a notification through the text. Now, another thing that we have also on the window is we are going to have a camera that will send images when unauthorized access has been detected. It will send images to the database, and we will get into how the Raspberry Pi sends these images in a later section of our presentation when we go over software. Now, the second part of our hardware is going to be the front door. And what we're going to do is we're going to have the same setup, the same module setup with a Raspberry Pi, a Wi-Fi module so it can communicate to our central service, and a 5-volt shield to help with electronics and make sure the Pi doesn't shield. What it's going to do is the Raspberry Pi is also going to be connected to a servo on the door lock itself, whether it be deadbolt or the actual door lock. And when it receives a signal through our web application, our phone application, to open the door, it will spin the lock, and it will also trigger the other servo and motor that we will have that will be placed on a sliding arm, much like a sliding door, but it will push and close the door. And based on what the app is telling it to do, whether open the door or close the door, it will pull it open and push it close. The third part of hardware is going to be a Raspberry Pi on a garage door. And what we're going to have to do is we're going to wire the Raspberry Pi, same setup with the Wi-Fi and shield. We're going to wire it into two parts of the garage door operating system. So we're going to operate the garage door button as well as the garage door motor. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to build a set of relays between the button, the Raspberry Pi, which is going to be located on top of the motor, as well as the motor itself. So you press a button on the phone application that says open garage door. It will first register with the door button on the garage, which will send a relay signal to the Raspberry Pi located on the motor, which will then communicate with the motor itself to whether open or close the door. And now some security features that we're going to use is we're also going to have built-in pressure plates on the door latch. So if those are broken, it sends you a text that says, hey, someone is breaking into your home, and it will also snap pictures through the webcam, as well as the window. There will be pressure sensors on the bottom of the window. If someone picks a lock and opens it without you disarming the system, then that will also give you a text. And to talk about how we are going to communicate with our hardware, we'll go to our software specialist, Anthony.
So for our mobile app, we are going to use PhoneGap. PhoneGap is an open source free framework where we can develop for multiple platforms at the same time. It uses HTML5, CSS, JavaScript, so all of us are proficient in web development, so that's what we'll be using for this. We want to do this because we want to have the users have as much availability, and everyone has different types of cell phones, so we want iOS, Windows, Android, even BlackBerry to be involved to make sure we have as many users as possible. For the software, it's going to send signals to the Raspberry Pis, the commands to open, to disarm, and lock the door. We're also going to have a superuser for every household. The superuser will have access to every thing in the system. We'll also have other users that the superuser can grant tokens to these users that will expire with time or amount of usages, and they'll have access to doors and the garage as well with these tokens. How we're going to do this, we're going to have a central server that is written in Java. The mobile app will send commands to the server will then send those commands to the Raspberry Pi. Then we also want to have a web page that will mimic the functionality of the mobile app in case anyone wants to use a web page to access their stuff. They'll also be able to deauthorize access to their phone in case their phone gets stolen or they lose it, so no one can steal their phone and then gain access to everything in their house. We also, for our database, we're going to be writing it in Postgres, and Jared is going to explain.
So the database isn't too robust. There's mainly two things we needed to keep track of, and one is we decided early on that each address is going to have just one superuser, so we need to keep track of that. And two, we need to keep track of which locations a particular user has access to. Beyond that, we chose Postgres because it's, well, we all took the database course. We're all very familiar with Postgres. And two, there are a lot of resources out there on the web associated with Postgres. To talk about methodology and roles, I'm going to pass it on to Travis.
For our methodology, we reviewed several different methodologies before finally deciding on an agile development methodology. And we chose that because we wanted to be flexible in case we hit any roadblocks along the way and be able to test those out. And we are going to be organizing that using sprints, two-week-long sprints. And we're going to begin development in January, and then move on through February and develop the garage door, the app, and the database. And then in March, we're going to begin development on the door and the communication between hardware and software, and then move on to the window and finalizing the project. And then in May, we're going to continue testing and retesting. Oh, and the roles, Zach and I will be doing hardware, and Anthony and Jared will be doing the software.
So for testing, for the window, we're going to start with aluminum foil, make sure that when the foil gets broken, the circuit gets broken, and the Raspberry Pi sends the right commands. Once that works, we're going to actually move to real glass and actually test it in a real environment. For the door, we're going to start with a piece of plywood and get the motor set up, get the arm set up, get that moving, and then we're going to transition that to a real home door. For the garage, we're just going to go right into a home garage, one of our group members' garages, and deal with that. Also, for this, we want to market this app to businesses, to realty, and to parents and just normal households. Basically, for realty, they will obviously be the super user, and all the tenants will be given tokens, maybe based on the length of their leases. If something happens, like they can't pay rent or they have some kind of problem, they could also deauthorize their phones, so they won't have access to the homes anymore. Businesses can have all their employees have these tokens that allow them access to the building, so only employees are going to be in and out of these buildings. And for parents, they can do stuff with their children, set curfews, maybe times when they can and can't leave the house. Any questions?